Welcome to my final video on making Slither.io in Python, and I'm really excited for this video. I'm excited to wrap up the series. This is not by any means a perfect Slither.io, but I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out, and I'm hoping that you've learned quite a bit from this. My goal for today is to include font rendering so that we can actually render the player's score on the screen. Since that was a part of Slither.io, in the game it would show the scores of the top 10 players. I don't plan on doing that as extensive. I just want to have the player's score rendered on the screen. And for that, I have to cover font rendering, which is going to be pretty exciting to do. I think it's important to video games, so I'm glad to be able to teach it here. So to start with, and this is also going to be a really easy tutorial, luckily. To start with, I'm just going to create a font renderer class. I really like having multiple classes, and I like separating the code tasks. So I'm going to make a font renderer class. So I'm going to create a new Python file, font renderer.py. And this class, the last few classes we've done have been really complicated because of all the inheritance stuff. We've had object inherit from, or excuse me, player inherit from snake, which inherited from object, and it was kind of messy, but this doesn't inherit from anything. Class font renderer, and inside the constructor, we're only going to store 3 different variables, no parameters for the constructor needed because I just plan on adding the variables here. So to create the font renderer, we just need 3 variables. The first one will be the color, and this is really easy to do. All colors in Pygame are tuples, and I'm going to start with red. So that's just 255.00. That's the RGB code on a scale of 0 to 255. The next variable will be the size of the font. Self.size is equal to, and I'll start with 20. It will not stay at 20. We'll see the result later, but I'll just put 20 for now. That would kind of make sense. Finally, and this is the new stuff that we'll learn today, to render a font, you need to have a loaded font object. So Pygame has a command, pygame.font.font, and this will allow you to load in a new font. This returns a font object. So we're going to actually create a font object as a variable, self.font, our loaded font, is equal to pygame.font.font. And now the parameters for this, I believe this is just a constructor for a font class. I don't know for sure, but that's what it looks like. The parameters needed for this are simply the font name. And to start, I'm going to put none because Pygame allows you to specify none, and it will just load a default font for you. And that's what I want to start with. We'll change this at the end. So none. And then the next parameter will be, oh, I already forgot what the next one is the size, actually. So self.size. And that will give you a loaded font. Now the next part for the font renderer is simply to create a render font, or I'll call it render font. A function, render font. And this is where we will this is where we will render the font to the screen. And again, I'm doing this all from this class because I could theoretically put all of these variables inside the main game class, just dump it here as more private variables, and then add more code here in our render function, but that's not really very organized. So again, I'm using the font renderer class for this. Rendering font, for now we'll just render the word hello. This is going to be really easy. So there's also another command, is actually with our loaded font, there's a command that will let you render and generate a new surface or a new image basically. Font.render, and it would be self.font.render. This function here will create a new Pygame surface which we can draw, and a surface, you can think of it as like an image that we can draw to a screen. And so to run this function, it requires 3 parameters. The first one being, and let me look to my notes because I actually recently learned this. Alright, so the first one is the text that we want to render. So I'm going to render hello. The second parameter is just going to be true. And then the last parameter is going to be the color that we wish to render. And we have a color private variable here. So I'm going to put color, self.color. Now this command here, this will generate an image, but in order for us to actually do anything with this, we got to catch the value that's returned by this function call. So I'm going to call it text image, or I could just call it text. I'll call it text. It's equal to, and then that command we just typed. Lastly, we need to actually draw this with the window. And we don't have the window here, so I'm going to add it as a parameter, window. I mean, most of our render functions, our draw functions, if you recall from the snake, already have a window parameter for them, so I don't mind adding it here. Window dot blit, because blit's what you use to render images, or surfaces is the more specific term. So you can really just think of this as an image that we generated, only the image is just this text here. Window.blit, we're going to render what image? The text image that we just created. And where? And I'm going to render it in the, I thought about different locations for this video, but not only is the top left corner the easiest, I also think it looks the best. You can render it in a different corner if you'd like, but I'm going to put 0, 0 as a tuple, because those are the arguments for the blit command. The surface that you're drawing and the position. So this completes the font renderer class for now. I'm going to go in main game.py and implement it. So in the top, in the constructor, I need to actually create a font. Self.font renderer is equal to font renderer. If I can type that out. So now we have a font renderer. And now inside the render function for the main game, here's where the background image is, or not the background image, but the background color is drawn. Here's where the orbs are drawn, the snakes, and then before we update the display, this is where I'm going to draw the hello message. So self.font_renderer.render font. The render font is the function we just made here. We're going to call that function and passing in the window here. Now, if I were to run the program here, it would not work because I need to introduce something slightly new, and some more advanced Pygame users than me would already know about this. But if I run this, there's going to be an error. It's going to say, oh, it's going to say font render is not defined. Well, that's actually because I need to import it. So we created font renderer here, but I actually got to import that class. So I'm going to do that. And now we're going to get a different error. It's going to say font not initialized, which seems to make no sense because here is where we load this font object using this here. It says it's not initialized though. The reason being, if you do not call the pygame.init function, you are not going to be able to render font. The pygame.init function looks like this, pygame.init. And all it does is it initializes all of Pygame's internal works, and it just gets it ready to go when you start rendering stuff. I've never used this function because I've never found it necessary until now for this video, because we initialize kind of manually. We manually create our window dimensions, our window, we set up our win color, clock, all this, and I always looked over pygame.init. But for the purpose of font rendering, you will need to call this function before you ever try to render a font. So I'm not going to do it here. What I'm going to do is in main.game.py, I'm going to make the first thing we do when we create this main game object in its constructor, the first thing I'll do is call that function pygame.init. And now the font will be rendered here. And now you can see it in this corner of the screen. I just died, that's fine. Hello, it's really small. There is hello in the top left corner of the screen there. So now the rest of this video is going to be even easier. The only new stuff was this command here and this command here. So now, just for fine tuning, in my spare time I found the best value to be 80, at least for this font and the size of my window. I just really like that size there and where it's positioned. And now, let me show you actually the next step, because we have font rendered to the screen, but it's just hello. Now what we want to do is render the player's score to the screen, because hello just doesn't cut it. But we need to pass in the player's score to this function here. And before I even change anything inside of here, I'm going to go to main game and make that correction. So at the bottom, self.fontrenderer.renderFont, self.window, and then self.player.score. Now back to font renderer, we have the score properly passed in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this with score, space, and then I want to add this score number to this string here, so we get a nice looking display. But this is an integer, so you'll have to convert it to a string, like that, using stir. And then inside of that I will put score. This will convert the integer score into a string, which we can then concatenate or add to this string here. And now we indeed see the player's score getting added to the screen. I've coded it to add by 5 each time, but now would be a good time to change the numbers if you don't like to see, that rapid jumping. And now this video is almost done, but the last thing I'm going to show is rendering different fonts. This is basically our entire game here, but I want to show more exciting fonts than none. You can go online and Google true type fonts, which are just files that will have the extension TTF. And I already did some Googling, and I'll add a link in the description for a site I found. But I found a download for the Minecraft font, which I thought, is it fitting for Slither.io? No, but I wanted something more pixelated. So what I did is I already downloaded the Minecraft font here, minecraft.ttf. So I'm going to copy this. And now what I'm going to do is I actually got to open where the project is. And so for me, I know where it is. It's just under users and then PyCharm projects, slither.io. And so now I have the directory pulled up for the files. I'm going to keep this to the side. What I'm going to do here, remember in a previous tutorial, I taught that it's good to separate your different kinds of files. So I have code here. I have the textures here. I'm going to create a new directory for the font, because even though we only have one font, perhaps you would want to add more later. And again, it's just always good to separate your files. So now that I created that font directory, I'm going to go back to the folder I found. Fonts is added, and I'm just going to paste the Minecraft font here, and you can use any font you'd like. You just have to go and download one. And now it is added. PyCharm recognized that I just now pasted that file. So now PyCharm is all set up. I just need to change this value here. And what I'm going to change it to is fonts/minecraft.ttf. And that will change the font, because remember, we can't just put minecraft.ttf. When this pygame.font function runs, it's going to look for this file or this directory relative to the font renderer file. So it's going to start with this file and look in this directory, which includes the fonts folder, and you have to include fonts / in order to actually get this inside. But now if I run it, we have a pixelated Minecraft font. I'm not even sure how accurate this is. It looks fine. When I was Googling, I just wanted something pixelated. I'm going to make one more change. I'm going to change the color to, maybe I'll do this. Yeah, yellow I think looks better. So that's just 255 for red and 255 for green. That will give you yellow. And now congratulations, this is the last video for Slither.io. You made it, you finished the game, and I want to thank you for watching up to this point. And I plan on adding more tutorial series in the future, hopefully ones that are more beginner friendly, since this I started right away with you gotta know Pygame and you gotta know Python. But hopefully I can come up with more ideas where you don't need to have any prior knowledge to the specific field. Well, thank you for watching, and whatever tutorial series I decide on next, hopefully I'll see you there.